What is going on, Pretender here, back with another Honkai Star video. And today we're going to be talking about one of the 3.3 characters, this time being Cipher, and why she actually may become the best in slot for two very strong teams right now, being Feixiao and Acheron. So the way this video is going to work first I'll be talking about both the Feixiao and Acheron team and what Cipher is kind of competing on for a slot on there. Then I'll kind of be briefly going over what Cipher does and what she actually brings to the table. And then my main reasonings on why I think she might actually replace the best in slots that we do already have on those teams, making her actually the new best in slot for these actual teams. So all I want to say before I get into the video, if you guys found this video helpful in any way, shape, or form, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new and haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for future videos like this along with all other types of Star content. And let's get straight into the video. So first, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about what Cipher is actually competing with on these teams. This actually does depend on you personally because there are different options right now. For an E0 Acheron, she is competing with Xiaochu and then the other Nihility slot, which she will definitely already beat. In this case, I'll use Pela as an example, and then E2, she is just competing with Xiaochu. And then for Feixiao, she is mainly competing with either Topaz or Hunt March 7th, whichever one you are using, because both of them have their perks, you know, one can be better than the other in certain cases. And then very commonly now owned is E1 S1 Topaz, which usually is the best in the majority of cases, besides some specific setups with March. But that is what Cipher would be competing with on the Feixiao team. So with Xiaochu and Acheron's team, he is already the best undisputed teammate right now, with the ability of having really good debuffs for Acheron, being general vulnerability, also ultimate vulnerability, which scales Acheron's damage the best, and also the fact that he can generate stacks on the enemy's turn. So against fast enemies, he always pulls ahead no matter what the case is. The second Nihility that is her second best to use is usually always Pela, thanks to the fact that she just has an AoE defense shred with a 40% exposed debuff on her ultimate and is very easy to cycle. So it practically becomes a very common 40% defense down on enemies, so Acheron's all hits everyone and does a bunch of damage to them, more than it already would. And then at E2 Acheron, it's usually you boot off Pela, replace a Harmony character, and Xiaochu is the Nihility you do keep, because his debuffs are best and his ability of actual stacking on enemies' turns always pulls ahead of any other Nihility, because other Nihilities will actually have to get them to attack them to give Acheron a stack, while Xiaochu can get stacks on his turn and the enemy's turn. And then with Topaz, that's Hunt March 7th, you do have Topaz with their very high attack frequency, which generates Feixiao stacks very fast. And she also does have her skill debuff, which makes enemies take 50% follow-up damage, which Feixiao's whole kit is revolved around that. She has a follow-up, her ultimate is considered follow-up damage, that's how you get a big damage boost. Topaz herself, her damage is okay, she's a sub-DPS, so it adds up, but it's still not too big, especially since she is an older unit, so lower multipliers and such. So the whole thing is she has the highest attack frequency while having slightly, or pretty much the lowest damage, but her debuffs are just so good, 50% actual follow-up vulnerability, and then if you have the E1, that becomes up to 50% follow-up crit damage. With that actual new depth or state you get in the E1, so 50% follow-up damage taken increase and 50% crit damage dealt by follow-up attacks to that enemy. And Topaz always stacks it up practically right away as you do attack. So very high attack frequency, the practical best debuffs you could have, is why she usually at E1 and S1, especially because S1 helps even more, but I'm not going to talk about that because you can put that S1 on March as well. She usually would be the one to pull ahead. On the flip side, we do actually have March, which has slightly less attack frequency, but still does have actual good damage and attack frequency at the same time. On top of that, she could actually give you a 10% speed buff, which is really good for certain setups. You can actually have a setup where you run Feixiao on attack boots and still get her to breakpoint speed, as Feixiao already has a high base speed, so you only need a few speed rolls plus the Shifu buff that March does provide, and you get a breakpoint speed despite running actual attack boots. March also does give Shifu crit damage 60% increase, and also 36% increase to break effect, and March is also able to lower the enemy's weakness if they would have wind weakness in this case, because you give the buff to her, and she's actually able to lower the toughness if the enemies have the same weakness as the Shifu. So if you're in a battle where they have wind weakness but not fire weakness, Topaz can't lower toughness, but if you are running March, she will be able to because she's able to since Feixiao is wind. And March is also a free E6, so you get all the benefits from the actual dupes as well. So in some cases, she actually could pull ahead. So now what does Cipher actually bring to this table that actually makes her as good or better in a lot of cases? For one, I will mention the Acheron consideration does come if you do have the Lycon. If you don't have the Lycon and have E0, S0, Xiaochu, or Cipher, but have like E2 Acheron, then Xiaochu is still better. But if you have the Lycon, that's when the consideration does happen for Cipher being better on those teams because it actually gives her access to a consistent debuff to apply. Especially one that would make enemies take more damage to actually buff Acheron's damage at the same time. If you don't have it, then she doesn't have as many debuffs to apply. But actually talk about Cipher's base kit first, so she is able to actually have a debuff with her skill, which makes enemies do less damage and also increase Cipher's own attack. But at base, it's mainly her actual damage output is what puts her at a consideration. While someone like Topaz or March may make Feixiao herself do more damage, yes. Same thing with, running Xiaochu, Pela with Acheron. It's now that Cipher has really good damage output is what puts her up there. With high frequency and high damage output these teams can have, the recorded damage of both the non-true damage that Cipher does have and the true damage that Cipher does have that she's able to proc, both of them get stacked up pretty high. And once you do use the follow-up / ultimate to actually clear it, the damage output that you do have recorded is super high because Acheron's ultimate hits everyone like a truck, so the enemy that you are targeting is going to get hit with a lot of damage. And then especially the enemies beside, because she's able to do that with whatever traces, she's able to do a lot of damage to these enemies now. And then with Feixiao, whoever you're hitting, that single target person you're hitting is going to have a bunch of recorded damage as well, just because you're doing so much. Biggest thing is now Cipher doesn't only have her follow-up attack be procced one time refreshing by ultimate, it is now every turn. Cipher is also built very fast, and so because she's also built really fast, you're going to be getting a lot of turns, meaning you're also going to be able to refresh the actual follow-up attack a lot. And the damage output you would do with Cipher as opposed to Topaz or March is significantly higher, which is going to add up the total overall damage. And so on the Feixiao team, Feixiao herself may be doing less damage, but because Cipher is so much better of a sub-DPS for her own damage, like genuinely having some main DPS type levels of damage despite being a sub-DPS, she is actually able to compete with that damage output total being actual better overall, just because she has now good frequency, being able to record all this damage, and once you do have all this stuff proc, it does so much more damage than any of the other two would. On top of that, she still actually is going to make Feixiao do more damage even if you don't have her light cone, just because if she's on the field, she makes enemies take 40% more damage. So this is good because now you don't actually have to shift around Topaz's debuff, you can just attack whoever and they will be taking more damage. And then when we actually look at her light cone, that gives her a speed increase, so that makes her easier to build. And then it actually gives her access to up to 2 different debuffs, one being the bamboozled state and the other being the theft state, which both of them will make enemies' defense go down anytime the wearer does use an attack and hits them. And that's what actually gives her very good stack generation, because you're constantly being able to hit these enemies and reapply this debuff on them. If they already have it, obviously you can't reapply it, and you can actually apply up to both, but only the latest effect would be active. But this gives her access to a lot more output of debuff applications, which actually puts her up to the Xiaochu level for Acheron. And she actually is able to generate as much stacks on enemies that Xiaochu could. Xiaochu still does actually pull ahead when it comes to enemies who attack a lot more, especially if you're able to refresh the ultimate a lot more because enemies are constantly attacking you. Xiaochu actually, with an eagle set and high speed build, is able to attack a lot as well. In those cases, or in pure fiction, his stack generation is actually better. But Cipher, with their high speed, with the light cone debuff and everything she does provide, is just super good for Acheron. Good debuffs that will benefit Acheron's overall damage. Fantastic sub DPS, again, Xiaochu is not going to be doing the damage. He doesn't really do any damage, but Cipher's damage is so high to the point it actually makes up for the potential less ults you could get, which in a lot of cases, you're actually not going to be getting less ults with Acheron if you do have Cipher's light cone. Making enemies take 40% more damage with just Cipher existing on the field, the light cone now making everyone have defense shred if she just hit them and applies these states, having good stack generation for Acheron. That actually in cases could outperform Xiaochu. I already mentioned the cases where Xiaochu would outperform, but if enemies aren't attacking as much, and we have enemies that do big attacks but don't attack that often right now, like just look at the Flame Reaver, Xiaochu doesn't really do too well on there. Someone like Cipher is going to be better because she's attacking so much more and is able to apply debuffs at a very fast rate. But the main thing is her sub DPS and just her damage output potential is just so good to the point it would make up for any downside. She does so much damage as a character that's mainly helping and assisting your main DPS, so you could probably consider her to be the main DPS at some times. We've already seen some videos where she actually outperforms the main DPS in question. She's outperformed Feixiao in certain setups and Acheron. It's really funny because her damage output now is just that good. Her debuffs are really good, and with the potential of the recorded damage procs you can get on her, it's just super good for her damage. So the gist of it is she can actually be better thanks to the fact that she has good debuffs for both these characters. If you have the light cone, she then becomes a consideration for Acheron. she actually does become better than Xiaochu in most cases for an E2 Acheron. At E0, then you definitely would have run Xiaochu and Cipher at the same time. There are still some cases where Xiaochu can pull ahead, as I mentioned, but with everything that Cipher does provide, again, the actual making everyone just take more damage, with their light cone, making everyone have defense shred if you do hit them and implant the states. And then the main thing is her insane damage output, which adds up to most of the things you could do, is why she actually might be the one to outperform these characters. And not even might, a lot of cases already show that she does. For Feixiao on the follow-up team with March and Topaz, booting them out pretty much. And then for Acheron, if you do have Cypher's Icon, actually booting out Xiaochu. If you do have E2, because then again, if you have E0 Acheron, she becomes a side grid, you want to run Xiaochu and Cipher. But in the case you actually don't have Cypher's Icon or you can't get it, then Xiaochu actually does do better at E0 S0. Cipher's damage output is actually just insanely good. So any theoretical damage loss you would have on your main DPS doing a bit less damage is actually just made up for the fact that Cipher herself just does insane damage. So the overall team damage and the overall damage you do, further increasing the speed of your clears, is why she is just so much better. But yeah, that is the video. That's why I do think Cipher is going to be the character that actually does replace 2 team slots. At the same time, if you're running Pela and Xiaochu, Cipher will just actually outperform Pela in every way pretty much. And then at E2, if you have Cypher's Icon, she outperforms Xiaochu in a lot of cases. For Feixiao, she just does better than Topaz and March. May have a bit less frequency, but just has super good damage to the point it beats them out. And just having good debuffs that will benefit Feixiao regardless is why she's just so damn strong right now. But yeah, that's the video. Hope you found it helpful. If it helped you in a decision if you want to get Cipher for these characters. Once again, if you guys found the video helpful, drop a like, would be greatly appreciated. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all other types of Star Wars content and guides. And I'll see you later. Peace out.